think the worst thing that ever happened to me was when my own younger brother broke my arm when I was just 14. But I was wrong. The worst thing was sitting in my parents' living room, listening to them casually say they would use my grandmother's entire estate to pay off Dean's $500,000 debt to a loan organization with ties to organized crime. Dean, the same brother who once sent me to the hospital, they didn't ask me, they just announced it, as if I were nothing more than a walking wallet. Have you ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you, who chose to stand with the one who hurt you? If my story speaks to you, please hit like and subscribe so you won't miss what came next. Because what happened after that family meeting changed everything. I remember that day clearly. A winter afternoon, the wind rustling through bare trees outside the window, brittle branches scraping the glass like they were trying to remind me of the past I'd tried to forget. My father sat in his usual leather chair, holding a glass of bourbon, his eyes calm, as if he'd just said he was fixing the roof or replacing the dishwasher. Not that he was about to use my grandmother's inheritance to rescue Dean from a blood debt. My mother wore her usual gentle facade, placing her hand on mine in some performance of empathy, but that same hand had silenced me too many times, soothing the surface while letting my bruises sink deeper into my soul. Dean leaned back on the couch. His old, worn-out hoodie couldn't hide the worry on his face. But it wasn't guilt. It was fear. Fear that no one would save him. The thing is, I'd seen that fear before. The first time, it was when Dean raised his fist, but his eyes were trembling. Back then, I thought I was the reason he was scared. Now I know he was scared of being held accountable. At 11, I'd already learned how to cover bruises with foundation. By 14, I had mastered holding my breath while Dean choked me in the living room, while my mother yelled from the kitchen, "Clara, stop teasing your brother like that." I once stood in the ER, my arm bent at a sickening angle, listening to my dad tell the doctor I fell playing basketball in the yard. No one asked if it was true. No one wanted the truth. Grandma Margaret was the only person who ever saw me. Truly saw me. Not the good daughter, not the model big sister, just Clara. A scared child trying to be strong because no one else would. She didn't ask many questions. She simply placed a savings book in my hand when I turned 17 and said, "You'll need this when it's time to leave." She said it softly, but her eyes were serious, like she had already seen this moment coming. My parents said Dean was in danger and they had no choice. But what about me? Did anyone send me to therapy back then? Did anyone tell me I deserved to feel safe? No, I was locked in silence. I learned to smile while the adults insisted Dean was just going through a tough phase. And me? I was expected to forgive, because I was a girl, and girls were supposed to be accommodating. "Clara, you're the successful one. You can help. Dean has nothing," my mother said, squeezing my hand as if family love alone was reason enough for me to give up the last shred of peace Grandma Margaret had left me. I pulled my hand away, quietly, like I had done for years, withdrawing from their manipulative conversations, from their hollow family above all sermons. But the silence inside me cracked. A wave rose up. A fury long buried finally demanded to speak. I looked at Dean, still the same eyes. A boy who never grew up, never took responsibility. "You hit me. So badly I had to be hospitalized." "Do you remember that?" I asked. The room turned cold in an instant. My parents froze. Dean looked away, lips pressed tight. "I was 14. You were 17. Not a kid anymore. You were an adult. And you nearly killed me," I said, each word like it was pulled from a wound that never really healed. "And yet, my parents told me to stay silent, still chose your side, and now? You want to take the only thing I have left to save you from your next mess?" My father stood, his eyes reddening. "Clara, that was a long time ago. Now's not the time." "Not the time? You think I forgot? You think I don't remember? Curling up in the closet, arms around my knees, praying Mom would come in time. But she didn't. No one did. It was just me. And the pain. And afterward, the silence. I didn't cry. I didn't need to anymore. Because now I understood. My emotions didn't need approval. I wasn't that little girl anymore, waiting for her parents' permission to feel hurt. I was no longer the one holding the family together with silence. I stood up. Grandma left that inheritance to me, not to save him, but to protect me. From him, from you, from everything that once tried to destroy me, while no one took the blame. And as I said those words, I saw my mother's eyes shift and lower. For the first time in my life, she didn't argue. She didn't scold. She didn't deny. But Dean scoffed. "Are you done performing? Because either way, if you don't help me, you'll have to live with that. Can you live with knowing you let your brother die, Clara?" That question still echoes in my head, not because I don't have an answer, but because I know it's the kind of question manipulators ask to make survivors feel guilty for surviving. And I've heard that voice for far too long. After that meeting, I drove home in complete silence. No music, no voices, just the wind hissing through the cracks in the window and my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. I sat in the parking lot outside my apartment, hands still gripping the wheel even though the engine had long shut off. Everything had happened too fast, but also too predictably. My father's stare still carried that old authority and condescension. My mother's voice still sounded sweet and hollow, like a lullaby for a crying child. And Dean? Still the arrogance. Still using his dark past as an excuse to drag everyone else down with him. I stayed in the car a long time, not ready to step inside. Inside me, a quiet conversation had begun. With Grandma Margaret. She used to tell me, whenever you feel yourself being pulled backward into the past, stop and ask, am I protecting someone from pain or just avoiding my own? I whispered, Grandma, I've been avoiding it my whole life, but I'm so tired. My apartment was small, one bedroom, neat and intentional. Everything in it had a purpose. Every detail reflected my longing for peace. In the corner of the living room, Grandma Margaret's photo sat beside a vase of dried flowers. Her smile in the picture wasn't wide. It was soft, like she was listening. I sat down across from it, opened the drawer, and pulled out the envelope she had left me on my 30th birthday. I had never opened it. She had told me, save it for when you need to remember why you still have to keep going, even when everyone turns away. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of thin paper, her handwriting in soft purple ink. Dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means you're standing at the crossroads between duty and self-protection. You do not have to choose sacrifice. You were not born to be someone's shield. You were born to rise, to live fully, and to walk forward on your own. I folded the letter, my chest full of something strange. Not relief, not quite pain. Like I had finally exhaled for the first time in years. I hadn't been living. I had just been surviving, playing a role my family had cast me in. The next day, I took a day off work. I needed time to understand exactly what I was facing. I brought with me the savings book, my grandmother's will, and all the legal documents related to the estate. Everything was valid. I was the sole heir. The assets were significant. One property in Colorado, a large investment portfolio, and several personal items of historical value that she had kept her entire life. I began to understand why my parents were so anxious. It wasn't just about Dean's debt. They were going bankrupt. All the whispers I had overheard at family gatherings, all the times my mom dodged questions about their retirement plans. Everything now fit together like a complete puzzle. And worse, they had bet on me continuing to be obedient like before. I called an old friend, Victor. We had dated once and stayed friends after. He's now the director of a nonprofit that helps victims of family abuse regain financial independence. When I told him everything, Victor didn't interrupt. He just said, "Clara, this isn't about money anymore. This is about whether you're going to keep letting them control your life." I met Victor that same afternoon. We sat at a small coffee shop downtown. He brought a folder of documents and a list of attorneys who specialize in protecting personal assets from abuse by relatives. I asked, "If I wanted to transfer everything into a form no one could touch, not even my parents, not even me if I ever became mentally unfit, would that be possible?" Victor nodded. "Yes, it's called an irrevocable trust, managed by a third party with terms designed to shield the assets from any form of coercion or emotional manipulation." I thought of the house Grandma Maga left behind. It wasn't just property. It was a place where I felt safe, where I was once held in her arms and believed the world still had peaceful corners. And now, even that place was at risk of being sold to save a man who used to make me panic every time I heard a door slam. I made my decision. I wasn't going to let that happen. Victor arranged a meeting with a lawyer named Eleanor, coincidentally the same name as my grandmother, which moved me more than I expected. She was cool and sharp, but when she heard my story, her gaze softened for a moment. "I've worked with many women like you," she said. "Smart, successful, strong. But inside, there's still a child who was forced to stay silent. That child needs rescuing." I signed the stack of papers Eleanor prepared. That day, everything started to change. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I was exhausted from being the one who carried everything in a family that never understood fairness. I went home, turned on the kitchen light, and made a cup of tea. The soft glow fell across a photo of Grandma Margaret. I whispered, "I'll protect everything you held onto. Not because of money, but because you were the only one who believed I deserved a decent life. As for the rest, I'd face it alone." I couldn't sleep that night. The memories kept flooding in like waves, drowning every effort to stay calm. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dean's glare in the dark, the bedroom door kicked open, my mother's rushed footsteps. Not to save me, but to silence me. I used to think if I stayed quiet long enough, everything would disappear. But silence never heals. It only deepens the wounds. The next morning, I took the old key I had kept and drove to my parents' house in the suburbs. They were out, most likely at church, as usual on Sunday mornings. I used to take care of that house during winters when they went to Florida, replacing locks, fixing pipes, mowing the lawn, quietly fulfilling the duty of a good daughter. But today, I was there for a different reason. I stepped into my father's office, what he proudly called the family strategy room. The bookshelf held thick, dusty law books. The desk was suspiciously neat. Too empty. I opened the third drawer, where he usually kept important documents. It still had a password, but I had once seen him type it in, thinking I wasn't watching. The first 3 letters of my name followed by Dean's birth year. My hand trembled as the drawer slid open. Inside was a light blue folder labeled Family Trust Restructure. I opened it. Each page squeezed the breath out of me. They weren't just planning to transfer my assets into a trust they would control. There was also a draft letter to the court requesting a competency review, claiming I was traumatized by past events and no longer mentally fit to manage my estate. I froze at another letter, this one addressed to a law firm I'd never heard of, written by my mother. She wrote, "Clara may resist at first, but if we soften her with talk about Dean's debt, she'll understand. She's always weak to guilt." That sentence knocked the air out of me. Weak to guilt. Not love, not compassion. They saw my empathy as a flaw. They turned it into a tool. I kept searching and found another file detailing Dean's short-term loans. Signed under his own name but guaranteed by my parents. Many of the lenders weren't legitimate. Most names were initials, no addresses. But one stood out. V.L. Dillard. I had heard Victor mention that name during a financial crimes seminar. A known figure linked to illegal loan networks in the South. That meant Dean was involved in something far darker than they had admitted. I pulled out my phone and took photos of every page, every note, every plan. Before leaving, I opened a section of the bookshelf and pulled out a small wooden box hidden behind old law books. It was where my father kept things he didn't want my mother to find. I opened it and couldn't believe what I saw. A savings book in Grandma Margaret's name. The very account she once told me she'd set aside for me when I was in college. I had never seen it, never received any funds. For years, I thought she had forgotten or changed her mind. But now I understood. It was never meant to be hidden from me. They had kept it, waiting for a moment when they thought I'd be too stubborn and needed leverage. I closed the box, put everything back exactly as it was, and left the house. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just saw with perfect clarity. I could not let any of them touch a single cent of what Grandma Margaret had left behind. Not just because of its financial worth, but because it was the legacy of a woman who had lived with dignity, who loved me when no one else did, who taught me how to protect myself in a family where kindness was always exploited. When I got home, Victor was waiting in the parking lot. He said he had received a tip from a contact in banking. My parents had met with a private financial advisor, asking how to shift funds from the pending estate into a pooled investment account under a family welfare trust. They were accelerating their timeline. Maybe because they knew I suspected something. Or maybe because Dean had received a warning from someone he owed. Either way, I was out of time. I sat down and told Victor everything I had found. He listened quietly, then said, "You have enough evidence, and you have every right to protect what's yours. They won't let go easily, but they're not holding the cards." I nodded. The old ache in my chest still pulsed, but for the first time, I felt like I was steering my life. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't make my parents apologize for what they enabled. I couldn't force Dean to feel remorse. But I could stop them from causing more harm. Not just to me, but to anyone else they tried to drag into this spiral. And to do that, I had to act before they made their final move. The next day, I left my apartment early. The sky was still gray, a cold wind sweeping across the rooftops, as if the city itself was holding its breath for something that was about to happen. I arrived at Eleanor's office right as the clock struck 7:30 a.m. She was already there, her hair neatly tied up, her eyes sharp and alert, as if she'd never left her desk. On the table was a fresh stack of documents, the kind I knew would be the first wall standing between me and my parents' intentions. "We need to act today," Eleanor said without preamble. "They're moving fast, and I'm afraid if you're not careful, they'll try to fabricate evidence to take away your legal autonomy over this inheritance." I signed each page, my hand slightly trembling, but my heart steady. I was doing the right thing. Eleanor helped me establish an irrevocable trust named after Grandma Margaret, with terms so strict that even I wouldn't be able to alter anything in the future without oversight from an independent board. Victor was there too, carefully reviewing each clause. When we finalized all the legal paperwork, Eleanor handed me a certified copy, her voice firm and calm. "From now on, no one can touch this estate. Not your parents, not Dean, not even you, unless you have a legitimate reason and approval from the Oversight Council." I sat still for a few seconds, then nodded. Not because I hesitated, but because I was feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Like I had just put a period at the end of a chapter I'd been surviving for far too long. Together we went to the notary office to register all documents related to the real estate, investment accounts, and ownership of physical assets. By noon, we had completed all necessary procedures to ensure that every part of Grandma Margaret's legacy now belonged to a legally independent entity, untouchable without approval from the designated third-party board. That afternoon, I returned to my apartment. I opened my laptop, logged into the trust management system, and looked at the list of assets clearly laid out. The house in Boulder, the antique jewelry collection, an investment account worth over $2 million, and a small but special property, a weathered wooden cabin in the Aspen Mountains, where Grandma and I used to escape during the holidays from tense family dinners. My hand slid gently across the screen, as if I were touching each memory, each scar that had shaped the person I'd become. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about control. It was about preserving something unsullied by manipulation, betrayal, and unacknowledged sacrifice. That evening, I sat in the living room, the table lamp casting a soft glow over a handwritten letter from Grandma Margaret. I took her photo frame, wiped away the fine layer of dust with my sleeve, and whispered, "I did it, Grandma. I kept my promise." An hour later, Victor stopped by. He brought 2 cups of chamomile tea and a bag of cinnamon butter toast. We sat across from each other, sipping tea in silence. No need for words. His presence was all I needed. Someone who didn't judge, didn't push, didn't impose anything on me. "I found a few more things," Victor said, pulling a new file from his bag. "Dean is under investigation by a special unit targeting predatory loan networks. The name V.L. Dillard has been on the FBI's radar. They haven't acted yet due to lack of evidence, but Dean borrowing money from him could put your entire family in danger." I gripped the teacup tightly. The heat seared my fingertips, but I didn't let go. What filled my mind wasn't just fear. It was anger. Because I had tried to stop this from happening a long time ago, but no one listened. No one believed me. No one cared. Victor studied me for a moment, then asked gently, "Do you want to confront them? Speak to them directly, before they get in any deeper?" I didn't answer right away. I needed to think. Not because I feared confrontation, but because I needed to be sure that, if I spoke up, I wouldn't let myself be pushed back again. I wouldn't fall into the same emotional trap, forced to forgive, to soften, to sacrifice. "I'll meet them," I said slowly. "But not to negotiate, to inform." Victor nodded. "I'll go with you if you want." I was quiet for a long while, then nodded. In my heart, something was forming. Not revenge, but a boundary. And that boundary would not be blurred by anyone. I chose Saturday. An ordinary day, far enough from the work week to avoid distraction, close enough to catch them off guard. I texted my mother saying I wanted to come by for a private talk. She replied in under 5 minutes, with that familiar, gentle tone tinged with satisfaction. "I knew you'd come around. We've always trusted that you're the rational one." I said nothing more. I simply prepared what I needed. Copies of the legal documents, the asset transfer files, the notarized contracts, the photos of the papers I'd found in my father's office. I packed them neatly into a black folder, tied it securely, and placed it in my bag beside the journal Grandma Margaret used to write in every morning. On Saturday morning, I wore a light blue blouse, plain jeans, no makeup. I wanted them to see me. No masks, no defenses, no fear. Just a daughter too exhausted to pretend anymore. Their house sat at the end of a tree-lined street. Same stone walkway, same red brick walls, and the doorbell chimed softly when I pressed it. My mother opened the door, her face lightly made up, the scent of her usual jasmine perfume in the air. She hugged me, quickly, lightly, more formality than affection. "Come in, dear, your father's making coffee." The living room was bathed in sunlight, spotless to the point of sterility. My father sat in the leather chair by the fireplace, coffee cup in hand, eyes scanning me like a financial report. Dean was already there, legs stretched out on the sofa, hoodie on, baseball cap pulled low. He glanced at me, then turned back to the window. Not a word. I sat in the chair opposite them and placed my bag on my lap. The room fell silent for a few seconds. Then my father spoke. "We're glad you've come to your senses. It's time to put family first, Clara. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I opened my bag, pulled out the folder, and placed it on the table. Before either of you say anything, I want you to read this. My mother looked at my father, then leaned down and picked up the folder. My father skimmed through it, his expression shifting noticeably. Dean sat up, frowning at the pages, then let out a scoffing laugh. Another scare tactic. It's not a scare tactic, I said calmly. These are the legal documents transferring the entirety of Grandma Margaret's estate into an irrevocable trust. Independently managed, legal representation included. No one can access it, not even me, without just cause and board approval. My mother went pale. She looked at my father, then back at me. Clara, you did this behind your family's back? Just like how you planned to restructure Grandma's estate without telling me? I asked, my eyes fixed on my father. Or like how you wrote a letter to a lawyer requesting a mental competency evaluation so you could seize control more easily? My father stood, his face flushed, but his voice trying to stay calm. You're overreacting. Everything we did was for the greater good. Dean is in danger. He owes bad people. If we don't help, the consequences could be severe. I turned to Dean. You once broke my arm when I was 14. You stole my tutoring money. You threatened to kill me if I told anyone. Mom and Dad knew, but they told me to stay silent. So tell me, when has the greater good ever included me? Dean sneered, then growled. You're just an ungrateful brat. We raised you, taught you, and now you think you're so successful you can judge everyone? Father. I looked at him and said nothing. The rage inside me no longer burned. It was cold. Still, like a frozen lake. I didn't come here to judge, I said. I came to make things clear. It's over. Every plan to use Grandma Margaret's inheritance to bail you out is done. And if anyone in this family tries to manipulate me again, I will go public with all the evidence. Including what you did to me before. Including the letters Mom and Dad sent to lawyers, trying to declare me legally incompetent. My mother put her hands over her face. My father was frozen. Dean hurled his coffee cup at the floor, liquid splashing, ceramic shattering. You're killing me, Clara, he yelled. They'll kill me if I don't get the money. I stood up, my voice soft but firm. No, you're killing yourself. And if you want help, I'm willing to support treatment for addiction, for rebuilding your life. But I won't fund your self-destruction. And I won't let you drag everyone down with you. My mother burst into tears. I couldn't tell if they were real or just from watching everything fall apart. My father stayed seated, staring at the floor, no longer the commanding presence he always tried to be. Dean was breathing hard, shaking by the window like a cornered animal. I grabbed my purse and turned toward the door. Just as my hand touched the knob, my father spoke. If you walk out of this house, Clara, you're no longer part of this family. I paused for a few seconds, then turned back and looked at them one last time. Family isn't a place where you have to sacrifice your dignity to be accepted. If that's the price for blind loyalty, I'm not buying. I walked out of the house that raised me but also once pushed me to the deepest corners of isolation. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I had learned something important. Once a door opens to the truth, you can't go back to pretending. And I no longer wanted to. I drove away from that house with a quiet ache in my chest. It had started to rain. Drops hit the windshield like the steady tapping of memories. Something had shattered. Not from the sound of Dean's cup hitting the floor, but from deep inside me. A part of me had still clung to the idea of family, even though it had long since rotted. And now, that part finally broke away in the cold rain pouring over the city. When I got home, I changed clothes, wrapped myself in a blanket, made a cup of hot cocoa, and sat motionless in the armchair by the window. I didn't turn on the lights. The dim glow from the street was enough for me to see my faint reflection in the glass. A 38-year-old woman. tired eyes, a gaze that was both resolute and worn. I didn't cry. There were no tears left after everything, but my chest felt like stone. I stayed like that until the phone rang. It was Victor. "I heard," he said, voice low. "Just got a call. Dean. Went to a bank today. Tried to open a credit account under your name." I closed my eyes. My throat tightened. "It didn't work," Victor continued. "The bank flagged it immediately and reported it to your attorney, per protocol. But I thought you should know." I thanked him and hung up. Nothing surprised me anymore. When someone has learned to survive by exploiting others, they don't stop just because they're told no. They keep going until they're forced to face their own consequences. The next morning, I met with Eleanor and Victor at the law office. We agreed to send a formal notice to my parents, stating that any attempt to access the estate through a third party under the pretense of family authority would be grounds for prosecution. Victor proposed something I hadn't considered, converting Grandma Margaret's trust into a charitable foundation. Still under my legal control, but with the sole mission of helping those who have suffered abuse from their own family. "You'll still maintain full oversight," Eleanor explained. "But once the assets are tied to a greater purpose, they become untouchable by emotional leverage." And maybe Margaret would have approved. I stayed silent for a long time. In my mind, I saw her sitting on the porch of that old house, knitting in her lap, her gaze distant as she spoke about the women in our family. She once whispered, "We've carried too much for too long, and we're never allowed to set it down." Maybe this was how to lay it down, not by discarding it, but by transforming it into something that mattered. "So you've been sitting around all day, not by discarding it, but by transforming it into something that mattered." I nodded. That afternoon, I returned to the old house in Boulder, not to meet anyone, but to visit the place where Grandma Margaret had lived, which had remained closed since she passed. The house still smelled of aged wood, herbal tea she brewed every morning, and the soft rustle of wind through the kitchen window. I walked room by room, touching everything. The piano she used to play, the half-finished embroidery cloth, the jar of strawberry preserves still labeled in her handwriting. "For Clara, when you're feeling low." I cried. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Not out of anger or pain, but longing. Because I had lived too long trying only to survive, forgetting that I too needed comfort. That night, I slept in the attic room where I used to read as a child. The old bedside lamp was still there, its shade stitched by her hands. I wrote in her journal, page by page, what I'd done, what I'd decided, and the questions that still lingered in my heart. Did I do the right thing, Grandma? If you were here, would you hold me? Or would you stay silent like they did? I didn't wait for an answer. Just writing it down made the weight feel lighter. The next morning, I woke with sunlight pouring through the window. I stepped out onto the porch and took a deep breath. The sky was clear. The trees in the distance were budding with new leaves. I brewed a pot of tea, just like she used to, poured one cup for myself, and placed another across from me. I sat there for a long time, thinking nothing, planning nothing, just being. And in that moment, I finally understood something I'd never had the courage to admit. I can't change my family. I can't heal them. I can't make them love me the way I needed. But I can choose my own path, and I can turn my pain into a refuge for others. I went back inside, opened my laptop, and began drafting a new charter for the charitable foundation named after Grandma Margaret. In it, I included a special provision. Every year, the foundation would sponsor at least 5 women who had suffered financial or physical abuse at the hands of their own families, giving them a chance to live again, without fear, without silence, without being labeled selfish just for choosing to protect themselves. I signed the document, my heart light as a breeze. Grandma, I've finally set it down. But not to abandon it, to begin again. For me. And for those like me. The news of Dean's arrest reached me on Tuesday morning, just 3 days after I walked out of that house. It came in a call from Eleanor, short but heavy, like a stone dropping into a deep well. She said the police had arrested Dean in the parking lot behind a bar on the south side of the city, just as he was trying to flee with a suitcase containing nearly $200,000 in cash, most of which was suspected to be money borrowed from a loan shark network tied to organized crime. I didn't say anything. I just held the phone and stared out the window. Morning sunlight filtered through the white curtains, casting a pale yellow sheen across the floor. I thought I would feel vindicated, that maybe, in some way, justice had found its way back. But no. I just felt tired. Dean was being held in county jail. The attorney my parents had hired was trying to petition for bail, but it had been denied due to his high flight risk. His situation was bad, not just because of the debt hanging over him like a blade, but because this time, no one was stepping in to carry it for him. I didn't visit, even though Eleanor said I had the right to, and might even be asked to testify if the case went federal. I didn't outright refuse, but in my heart, the answer was already clear. I didn't need to see Dean through a pane of glass to know what he was facing. I had lived with that look my entire childhood. The pleading look that only showed up when every other exit was blocked, when apologies were just tools, not beginnings. What surprised me more was my parents' response. One afternoon after the arrest, my mother called. Her voice was trembling, softer than usual. None of her usual sharpness. Just a mother, teetering at the edge of despair. "Clara," she said, "Dean was tricked. They set him up. You have to believe me. He's not that bad." I said nothing, just sat and let her speak. "Your father? He's falling apart. He hasn't slept in days, neither have I. We were wrong, I know that. But Dean is still my son. No matter how badly he's messed up, I can't abandon him." I asked, "And what about me, Mom? Have you ever lost sleep over me? Ever worried for me the way you worry for him?" Silence. A long pause. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered. "You've always been strong. You always got back up on your own. I thought you didn't need anyone." I gave a bitter laugh. "So because I didn't need anyone, you chose to be no one in my life." There was no reply. The call ended not with a click, but with a drawn-out silence that simply broke. That night, I sat alone in the little library at Grandma Margaret's house, where I had been staying to keep distance from the city. The room was still, only the wind brushing against the windows. I pulled out an old book and found a letter inside, one of Grandma's, written long ago but never opened. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting slanted but steady. "My dearest Clara, if one day you find yourself standing between pain and choice, remember this. Kindness does not mean self-destruction. Forgiveness does not mean returning to the place that broke you. And love does not only exist when you sacrifice yourself." I held the letter close. The pain inside me was no longer fire. It had become a quiet crack, not flashy or loud, but deep. The next morning, I learned my parents had sold the old house. They had no choice. 2 mortgages weighing them down, legal fees rising by the day. I didn't intervene, didn't try to stop it. I just watched from a distance, and when the house was cleared out, I received a package. It was from my mother. A small box wrapped in old velvet. Inside was a silver bracelet I had worn when I was 12. It had been broken during one of Dean's angry outbursts. I thought it had disappeared forever. Underneath was a small note, nothing elaborate. Just, "I kept it all this time. I didn't dare give it to you. But now, I think you should have it back." I held the bracelet, running my fingers over the clasp that had been welded back together. Rough, ugly, but strong. Like me. No longer whole, but reforged through losses I once thought would destroy me. I didn't call back, didn't write, didn't offer forgiveness, but I placed the bracelet in the nightstand drawer beside Grandma's photo. Not to forget, but to remind myself that sometimes what remains from a shattered past can still become part of healing. I kept moving forward, believing that what I had managed to preserve, my self-respect, my clarity, and the memory of a grandmother who loved me the right way, would be enough to keep me from ever walking that old road again. One late afternoon in early fall, I received a message from Victor. They came. No explanation, just those 3 words. But it was enough to freeze my fingers on the keyboard. I called immediately. Who? I asked, voice dry. Your parents. They came to my office this morning. No appointment. Asked to review the terms of Grandma Margaret's trust. They said they wanted to renegotiate on humanitarian grounds. I leaned back in my chair, my chest heavy. Not surprised, not angry. Just that familiar exhaustion returning. Victor continued slowly. I declined to meet with them. Eleanor did too, but they left a handwritten letter, asked me to deliver it to you. I haven't opened it, but maybe you should. That afternoon, Victor brought the letter to me. He didn't say much, just placed it on the table and left. I sat and stared at the envelope for a long time. Thick paper, pale yellow, my mother's graceful handwriting. I turned it over and opened it slowly, as if it held something that might change everything. But as I read, I realized nothing inside was truly new. I know you're angry. I know you feel betrayed. But Dean is your blood. How long can you keep turning your back on family? We all make mistakes. Family is about forgiveness. I'm not asking you for much. Just asking you to open your heart again. No apology, no mention of her silence while I was abused, no acknowledgement of their attempt to seize the estate, no mention of manipulation, just emotional bargaining. The same language they had always used to keep me locked in a loop. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside the silver bracelet and Grandma Margaret's letters. Then I stood up, put on my coat, and left the house. I drove to a place I hadn't visited in nearly 2 years, the cemetery where Grandma Margaret was laid to rest. The sky was overcast, the clouds heavy, the wind carrying the scent of damp grass and cold soil. I parked beneath the old maple trees and walked the gravel path to her grave. The headstone was simple, just her name, her birth year, and a short line. A quiet life, a fierce heart. I sat beside it, placed my hand on the stone. Ice cold, but peaceful. I tried, Grandma, I whispered. I did everything to keep my promise. I protected the estate. I didn't let them destroy it. But I don't know what to do with everything that's left. I bowed my head, letting the wind blow through my hair. My mind wandered back to those winter mornings when I was a child, sitting with her by the fire, her hand stroking my hair as she told stories about the women in our family. They endured too much, Clara. They didn't have choices. But you do. If you want to break that cycle, it'll take more than silence. Back then, I didn't understand. Now I do. Courage isn't about standing up to argue. It isn't about shouting at those who've hurt you. Courage is sitting beside the grave of someone you loved, admitting that you tried your best and still, it wasn't enough to save something that had long since rotted from within. I left the cemetery as the rain began to fall. On the way home, I stopped at a small gas station. While pumping gas, I saw a little girl asleep in the back seat of the car next to mine, clutching a teddy bear. Her face was peaceful, her long lashes closed like 2 tiny doors holding in dreams. I looked at her and felt something tighten in my chest. I used to be like that. I used to ride in cars believing the grown-ups would always protect me, that they'd never betray me. But that trust was shattered far too soon. Back at my small house, I sat down at the desk, opened my laptop, and wrote a letter. Not to anyone else, just to myself. Dear Clara, you've come a long way. From a little girl who always wondered why she wasn't loved the way her brother was, to a woman who knows how to protect the last good part of her life. You're not perfect, but you held on to what Grandma left you. Not just property, but dignity. And that's enough to start again. I saved the letter and named it Beginning. I didn't close the laptop, I just left it open, like a quiet reminder. Then I opened the drawer and took out the notebook where I had been planning the foundation. On the first page, I had written, "For those who were hurt by their own families, this will be a place where they are seen, not as victims but as survivors." I picked up my pen and kept writing. Line by line, no need to rush. Just don't stop. One winter morning, with light snow drifting outside the window, I sat in the small office inside the house in Boulder, flipping through the final documents. The charitable foundation named after Grandma Margaret was officially established after nearly 6 months of preparation. All the legal procedures were complete. Support criteria for victims had been carefully drafted, and a team of psychological, legal, and financial advisors had agreed to join me in the journey ahead. I still remember the moment I signed the final document. It didn't feel like victory. It wasn't radiant or triumphant. It felt like peace. Like setting down a heavy suitcase after a long road. In my heart, there were still cracks. But they no longer bled. They had become seams of healing, stitched together from fragments of the past. The launch of the foundation was simple, held in a warm space at the local community center. I didn't invite the media, didn't give a big speech. Just a few close friends, colleagues who had stood by me, and a handful of women we were going to support. One of them was Emily, 32, a single mother of 2. She had been financially controlled for years by both her husband and her father, so much so that she didn't even have her own bank account. I sat with her during her intake interview, and as she spoke, it felt like I was hearing echoes of my own story. The way she looked when she talked about her 8-year-old son left me speechless. She wasn't afraid of poverty. She was afraid her son would grow up learning how to treat women from what he had seen. "I don't need much," Emily said softly. "Just a safe place, and someone who believes I'm not crazy, not weak." I held her hand, said nothing. But something in me settled. I knew I was on the right path. At the end of the event, after everyone had left, I stayed alone in the room, looking at the warm yellow light glowing over the empty chairs. I imagined Grandma Margaret standing at the back row, smiling with a teacup in her hand. I heard her voice in my mind. "Clara, you can't save the whole world, but you can walk one person to shore." Back home, I received an unexpected call. It was from my father. His voice was weak, slow, lacking the authority of the man who used to run the family with nothing more than a glance and a few sharp words. He said he wanted to see me. Not at home, not at the law office, at a nursing facility north of the city. He said Mom was recovering there after a minor stroke, and he just wanted to talk. I hesitated for a long time, but I went. The nursing home was small, nestled in a shallow valley, snow piled high on the roof and windowsills. I walked through a quiet hallway lit by cold, fluorescent lights. My father sat by the window, a blanket across his knees, staring out at the pine trees swaying in the wind. He didn't turn when he heard my footsteps. "Your mother's asleep," he said, voice hoarse. "Doctor says she'll be okay, but it'll take time." I didn't answer. I sat across from him, silent, as if any sound would crack the air around us. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw no walls in his eyes, just fatigue, and something close to remorse. "I was wrong," he said. "More wrong than you ever knew." I clenched my hands gently, but didn't look away. I thought I was doing everything for the family, covering for Dean, staying silent with you, teaching you to be tough. But the truth is, I was scared of losing control, scared I'd be seen as a failure if I admitted you were stronger than me, that you saw things I couldn't. I didn't interrupt. What he said wouldn't erase the years I spent in the dark, but at least it was real. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said, voice now a low murmur. I know I don't have the right. But if you can, tell your mother you heard me. Don't let her go thinking you hate us all. I stood up, looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Not to promise forgiveness, but to confirm that I had listened. I left the nursing home as the snow began to fall harder. The flakes drifted slowly, landing on my hair and shoulders, cold but pure. I tilted my head back and breathed in deep. Inside, I didn't feel release or pain, just a space, empty but slowly being filled with something close to peace. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I won't go back to where I came from, not anymore. And maybe that's the only thing I need to keep going. I don't know what you would have done if you were me. Would you have stood up for the last part of yourself? Would you have drawn a line? Even if it meant walking away from the family you once thought was everything? My story isn't meant to ask for pity. It's to ask you one simple thing. If someday you have to choose between loyalty to your family and honesty with yourself, who would you choose? I would love to know your thoughts. What do you think about what I did? About Dean, my parents, Grandma Margaret? Have you been through something like this? Leave a comment below. I read and value every word you share. If you want to hear more real stories about families, about the simple choices that can change an entire life, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because this journey is far from over. And I believe, somewhere in these stories, you just might find a piece of yourself.